drummers against implied timekeeping, the 5 greatest jazz bebop drummers, and some others. I want to discuss a little bit about jazz drumming from a historical perspective, because I think it is very important for a lot of younger drummers to understand. And as a disclaimer, this is my opinion only. So I'm asking for those of you that are looking in, bear with me. Now, I'm of the thinking that if you're playing a certain style of music, over the long term you might change and go into different directions. So I think it's important to have a good overall background of the history of certain styles and the drummers that kind of really made them. And this one particular video, I want to talk about jazz bebop. I don't want to get into big band drumming, which preceded jazz and bebop, but I want to discuss just the particulars of jazz bebop, because that was from the years 1946 till about 1973, as jazz turned into fusion and rock and various other forms. And it's important because jazz at the time in 1946, all the way up into the mid-70s, was really the vanguard of drumming. Most of the stuff that was being done on the technical level was in jazz bebop. The 5 pillars of bebop drumming are Max Roach, Elvin Jones, Philly Joe Jones, Art Blakey, and Tony Williams. Those 5 guys are the anchor or the pillars of jazz bebop drumming. And as I say, let's not confuse it with big band or other stylings. Just the traditional bebop form from 1946 to the mid-70s. Those 5 drummers were the most advancing of the art form of drumming and jazz drumming in particular. And what's interesting about that now, when I look back at it, is when you see speed metal and a lot of blast beaters or heavy rock players, they're not familiar with a lot of these other styles of drumming. And it's really important now, because I look back on that. It would be the equivalent now of not knowing who John Longstreth of Origin, or George Callias, or Gene Hoglan in about 40 or 50 years from now. They wouldn't know who they were. And I don't want you to do that. I want you to understand different styles and different drummers. So I base everything off of the 5 drummers I just told you. But I want to discuss 5 or 6 others that I think are super important. I want you to know them. If you're on my channel, I want you to learn the things that I teach in the open-handed position. But I also think it's important to understand drumming history from different styles. Now, a drummer that I really respected and had the opportunity to see a few times was a guy out of New York named Ronnie Bedford. Before I did this video, I just looked him up, and he has a Wikipedia, a little bit about him from a historical view. I couldn't believe it, but Ronnie Bedford was a drummer in New York City in the 60s, the 70s, and 80s. And he passed away, I think, around 2012, somewhere in there. And there was some jazz festival in Wyoming that he started before he passed away. But I want younger drummers to remember him, because he was never really famous. But as a player, he was impeccable. Perfection. He'd set up his drums in any club in New York City in the 70s, and he would lay down some of the greatest Latin rhythms and timekeeping and ideas. He was one of those guys that just everyone knew how great Ronnie Bedford was. And I want you to know it, all right? He was unheralded. I don't think he had any endorsements and everything else that drummers try to get these days to have a marquee and name recognition. But if you're on my channel, know who Ronnie Bedford is. A second drummer I want you to know and remember from a historical point of view in jazz and bebop is Mickey Roker, R-O-K-E-R. Mickey is still alive. He's very elderly. He was another one of these drummers that was... everything he did, Latin, rhythm and blues, or jazz, bebop, he was fantastic. A lot of people, singers and various guitarists and pianists, always wanted to use Mickey Roker. If it wasn't in the five pillars, Mickey Roker was definitely right there as well, and he deserves respect. Roker, no Mickey Roker. The third drummer that comes to mind that was just absolutely fantastic in his day was Grady Tate. Grady Tate played rhythm and blues, jazz, bebop, and other kinds of things. And he was known. He was another one of these guys who may not have been famous as the five pillars, but he just laid down unbelievable time. He could play really fast too, and we all loved him. He played in New York, and maybe he went out to the West Coast a couple times, England. But you should know him, Grady Tate. If you're on my channel and you're subscribing here, I want you to know who he is. He was absolutely fantastic. The other one that comes to mind is Ed Blackwell. Ed Blackwell, out of, I think he was Washington, D.C. I'm not sure, but Ed Blackwell played also in the 70s, and he could play Latin rhythms and switch his hands in a very unique way. I saw him play several times, and I enjoyed him very much. He was wicked. Ed Blackwell, he passed away as well many years ago. But he was an unknown, and if you're on my channel, you want to know Ed Blackwell. If you're into jazz, bebop playing, look him up, all right? And the fifth, and I got to talk about this guy. In Los Angeles in the year, I think, 1981, I was at a club in downtown Los Angeles with another drummer, a friend of mine, George Edward Hodgins. And he's a very accomplished player, but we were with a bunch of people, and the guy who was drumming with a bass player named Octavio Bailey. He played with Sergio Mendes, and he was a Brazilian bass player of just great technical ability. His drummer was playing while we were talking. We arrived in the bar at some hotel, and we were all just fooling around and having a drink, and we were noticing this drummer from the corner of our eyes, me and this other guy. And I said to my buddy, I said, "Are you listening to this guy?" And the drummer who was playing with Octavio Bailey was, in my opinion, the greatest jazz bebop drummer of all times. And that includes Max Roach and the Five Pillars. I think this guy was the greatest I had ever seen. And his name was Ted Hawk. Ted Hawk was just kind of an unassuming drummer. But I only saw him once live, and he was absolutely... My God, we went to speak to him on the break, and we humbled ourselves, practically fell over and said to him, "Who are you?" And he was very, very unassuming and very polite with a lot of humility. Remember to always have humility, regardless of how your playing level is. And he just said, "I'm Ted Hawk," and he played with a lot of people, Carmen McRae and all sorts of singers and songwriters in Los Angeles. He played with Lenny Breau, the guitar player. Extraordinary player. And he went to Paris and came back to Los Angeles back and forth, so I didn't really know of him because I lived in Los Angeles. But after seeing him play in 1981, I never forgot how great he was. He did pass away in 2001 of cancer, but he set just a standard of how to play jazz bebop. And he was not famous, but he was famous within a lot of drum circles in Paris and in Los Angeles. I later found out, I realized many people gave him a lot of respect. And I want those drummers who are younger here, I don't care if you're not into jazz bebop at all, you want to know who Ted Hawk is. Because I went down to Pro Drum Shop on Vine Street, and I did speak to the old man Yeager there in the old days and asked in the early 80s about him, and Stan and Jerry knew him too. And they all said he was the greatest. So hats off. Those are the five unknowns that I want you to know that I just mentioned. But a couple more as well, all right? One is a guy out of London, England named Phil Seaman. Phil was a fantastic player and the actual inspiration to Ginger Baker and many other jazz guys. Another guy comes to mind is Ed Thigpen, tremendous on brushes. Know who he is. Ed Thigpen, unknown but a legend. Andrew Cyril, who was an avant-garde player who played with Cecil Taylor. I had the opportunity to see him play several times. Know him. Just know him. Andrew Cyril. Another is Kenny Clark. Fantastic drummer, underrated. for bebop and highly respected. And I want these men to be remembered. They were absolutely fantastic, and I saw them all. So I think it's important. All right. Again, this is the 5 greatest jazz bebop players of all time, and I'm not going to debate it. However, I want to mention these other guys. Some are heralded, but not as big as the 5 pillars. Another one would be like Jack DeJohnette and Louis Nash, Cozy Cole. They were all great players, but I want to go for more of the unknown guys as well. And that's why I mentioned these other 5 guys. And let me know what you think of them. Look them up. Listen to them play. YouTube, thank God, has a lot of stuff in their catalog that shows these guys. If you have any questions on anything to do with jazz or bebop, feel free to ask me, or just about any other style of music. I'm in the comments section. I'll try to answer as best I can. And twitter.com/drummersagainst, facebook.com/drummersagainst implied timekeeping. Welcome everyone who's visiting for the very first time. My catalog is very extensive, and I teach in a very particular way in the open-handed position to advance your independence, your power, and the thing that's most important that I'm trying to teach is your creativity as a drummer. And if you haven't, subscribe, because your subscription is the support for me to continue, and thanks always. So this is kind of my little, I guess, monologue on the 5 greatest jazz bebop guys. And if you enjoy it, I'll do more and discuss more particular players. But for me, it's my way of giving back from my experience and history of this great instrument that we have. All right, so my best to all of you, and let me know.